This is Twisted Passages with award-winning author Marie Sutro. Now, let's take a deep dive into the dark world of psychological thrillers and meet the authors who created them.
Hello, and welcome to Twisted Passages. I'm your host, Marie Sutro, and today we have Boston Globe bestselling author Clea Simon here to talk about her new release, The Butterfly Trap. Welcome, Clea.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming. I really cannot wait to dig in. But before we do, can you start us off with an overview of the story?
Sure. Thanks again. Well, The Butterfly Trap is a he said, she said. They're putting it under a psychological suspense, but I almost think it's more about gender roles and how we never really know what our partner is thinking. So it starts off with Greg, and you hear that he's, a research scientist, and he's always dreamed of meeting a beautiful woman, an artist who he could have a family with. And one night he does, and he falls in love. And let's say it's maybe a bit obsessive, but he's totally committed. And then halfway through, we start hearing from Anya's side of the story. And let's just say they have very different views of what their relationship is about.
I love the he said, she said element, but there's almost that issue of sometimes are we an unreliable narrator in our own lives in terms of what we think we do and how it affects others?
Exactly. Thank you so much for getting that, because yes, I hope, and it sounds like maybe you did get this. When we first hear Greg's story, we see him as he sees himself and as he wants to present himself, but there are hints that maybe he is not exactly as he appears. And then the same when it flips.
Sometimes there's obvious lies that someone tells in a relationship, right? And sometimes they're nice little lies like, oh yeah, you look good in that, but you really don't. And then sometimes there's the lies we tell ourselves. And I really love that. In this case, it's a romantic relationship, but it could be a family relationship, it could be friends. So many times we're so sure of what our position is, or we think we are, and we don't always think about how others are perceiving us. Was that something that you've played with in the past?
Thank you very much. I don't know if I like to, yes, I have done it in the past books. In Hold Me Down, the protagonist, both cases are women, they see themselves in a certain way and they present themselves to a certain way, but ideally the reader will be able to pick up that they have some very large blind spots. And that's where the fun is, because you want to show the reader who the person is through their actions. But we all believe that we're the heroes or the heroines of our own story, right?
And I love that, because you dropped so many little hints where, like you said, we start out with Greg and he's telling his story. And even sometimes in his telling of his story, you feel like, Greg, are you sugarcoating that? Because it kind of seems like you're trying to sell me on it and sell yourself on it.
Sell himself as much as anything, because we all see ourselves as the good guys.
I thought it was so interesting because, again, that concept of lies, it underpins so much of human interaction. Normally, the average person will say, oh, it's never good to lie. But then some people might say, well, in a certain instance, it's the kind thing to do. It's the right thing to do. So there's these morally gray areas around lies. And one of the things I was intrigued by was it's not just sometimes the way we see ourselves, it's the way other people decide to see it. And you did a beautiful job in this of giving us supporting characters that are making decisions sometimes about what they want to see and how they want to interpret it.
Excuse me. Yes, you're talking about some of Anya's. Well, actually, both of them have friends who, shall we say, may have different views, both of themselves and of Greg and Anya's relationship. And yes, they sort of serve to bounce off the reflection of what's really going on. Is there one truth? We don't really know that. And they certainly give the reader a chance to reevaluate what they thought was going on, either with Greg and Anya or with Greg and Anya and their buddies.
There were so many moments in reading this book that were so enjoyable because of the self-reflection for the reader and looking at it and thinking, gee, how many times have I taken a friend's side because I'm their friend. Years ago, I went to a wedding, and at the wedding, the priest actually said, the only way their relationship will be successful is if they don't just pledge to each other, but for all of you to pledge to support the relationship. Years later, I read your book and it's making me think about it again. We think we're supporting our friends, but because we don't always know, are we really supporting them and their relationship, or are we giving into maybe our own triggers or something else in our response to it?
That's really profound. And of course, the other factor is we think we're supporting our friends, but sometimes if you're supporting your friend doing something that you don't think is a good idea, do you encourage the friend? Do you try to move the friend away from it? And it's sort of, so it's not only about the friend, but it's, how does the friend see themselves? Do they see themselves as the total support? Or maybe I'm thinking in the case of one particular character who I think who I'm talking about, that friend might support one of the protagonist's lies because that friend has so much iffy stuff going on in their own life.
I think you use the term in the book a couple of times, being someone's wingman, whether it's a sibling, a friend, whoever it is, and you're trying to take their side and you're trying to be there for them. But again, are you doing that for them? Are you doing it for you? Do you have issues from the past where somebody wasn't there, so you're just going to blindly jump in and maybe you're doing the worst thing for them in that moment?
It's funny because my publisher put the tagline on the cover of the Butterfly Drop, says, what is it? It's like, one couple, two stories, who do you believe? I think it's more like one couple, 5 or 6 stories. And also, that makes me think, some people who read it, in fact, when my agent first read it, they said, well, I don't know if these people are likable, because like all of us, they're flawed and they make some pretty bad decisions. But what I was interested in was not so much making them likable, though I think that they are, but is making them sympathetic, making them people you believe in, making them people who you know.
And it's interesting, I don't ever want to give spoilers, but one of the characters, and you'll know who I'm talking about, makes decisions that are sometimes pragmatic decisions. And there is a history for this person in their group of having to make these kind of pragmatic decisions because of the way of the world, right? And there's people around her who support it and people who disagree with it. But it's fascinating to me because when you really look at that, I mean, you dug in, you took every gray area and you just started to, you threw them all open, Clea, to us and said, hey, all the things that we try to put in our head and say, well, this is wrong. You gave us all the nuanced gray areas of where maybe it's not wrong for this person, or maybe because of what's going on in their life, it's not wrong. And maybe in these circumstances, it's not wrong. Oh my gosh, to give us that kind of deep philosophical analysis in a thriller. I mean, my goodness, Clea, come on.
Thank you. But I mean, isn't that true for all of us? I mean, we all fudge a little bit. We all do things that are, skirt what we should be doing. But we feel like we have to, maybe, or we feel like circumstances, maybe something isn't perfect, but considering the circumstances, it's not even a question of little white lies. It's just acting in a way that maybe isn't quite on the square, shall we say, but we all do it. This is reality. This is how we live.
One of the things I thought was so powerful in this, and again, it's that way that you set it up as the he said, she said, watching this relationship evolve, the way that you tell the story, and then we have those parts of overlap where we're hearing the story from someone else's perspective. It made me think of what it's like for divorce attorneys. Wow. Because they meet everyone at the end of the story. They don't meet them in the beginning when, as you said, Greg sees Anya dancing and it's this beautiful scene. And I thought about how sad that is. And, some stories don't get to the point of divorce. Maybe it's just folks who are partners for a while and it ends. But there's always that beauty in the beginning of every love story. And really the way that you showed us all those human dynamics, it's so sad because you can see some stories were never meant to be. But some stories break down because of our own decisions.
And they do say with lawyers that the key is always who can tell the best story.
It was really interesting because you really see back at 30,000 feet looking down on us as human beings, just how complex we are.
Well, I like to think of it's not looking down at us, though. I understand what you're saying, but I like to think it's, I'm in there with, in the muck with these
Good
characters.
point. We're all in the trenches together.
We're all driven by, so many, our dreams, our desires, lust, fear, the economic reality of living, in a city, well, maybe living anywhere, but, in the case of Greg and Anya, living in an expensive city, and all this piles together. I mean, these maybe shouldn't be factors in the perfect romance, but these all come into play, and they all assert their pressure on these young man and this young woman, and they're just trying to make a go of it.
It's probably that inability for us, whether it's going, out to 30,000 feet or just saying, looking, pulling the lens back, because we're in the trenches every day. I think we do double down on things and think we're right, and we're on to the next thing, and I got to do this, and I got to get to work, and I got to go here, and I got to go there. It was so well done in all of those ways to really get us to confront those things within ourselves and make us think, wow, are there other relationships that might have worked in my past if XYZ variables had changed? It was just so fun. I mean, it's such a book club book for that reason.
Yeah, I mean, we have all been in relationships, whether or not we're, coupled or not coupled, our friends, our family. And I think anybody who's ever related, who isn't a hermit, or even a hermit before they were a hermit, anybody who's been in a relationship deals with this stuff. And it was so much fun for me to sort of look at this couple and sort of put them in a little pressure cooker, with their supportive friends and with their supportive communities, and just see what happens. I like to think it's whether or not we are this couple, we know this couple.
We all know this couple, and we've maybe been their friend or their family member or
their wingman.
Yeah, or even a coworker at work who, around the water cooler, somebody tells you something that happened over the weekend, and you get silly and you decide to give an opinion where you really shouldn't.
Or maybe you should, because maybe you'd be helping. Maybe one more person should have spoken out.
Exactly. And it's so many things hinge on the razor's edge in terms of what could affect an outcome. And then, even though you have the butterfly trap, it's that butterfly effect where those little things could have yielded such huge responses. So powerful for all of those reasons. I wanted to ask you, do you think fundamentally that relationships, be it friendships, intimate relationships, whatever they are, work better when people are similar or more of opposites?
Wow, that's a great question. When people are similar, they have more common ground. Perhaps there's a more basic understanding. But when people are similar, there are also more potential conflicts. For example, Anya and some of her artist friends. In fact, just as an aside, I have two friends who are painters, one of whom lives in an artist collective, sort of like Anya lives. And I had her read it, correct one or two technical things. But then she said, basically, it's spot on, except for the fact that we're all jealous of each other. So when you have somebody from a different field, you don't have that. But if you're from a different field, you have to go into it knowing what you don't know. You have to go into it knowing, that you need to communicate, that you need to be open and hear, and that there might be an entirely different language. And of course, you could say, the same thing. It's like, the men are from Mars, women are from Venus. I don't want to be dated on that. But, it is true that different genders and different roles, even in same gender relationships, often come to relationships with different expectations. In fact, I guess we all come to relationships with different expectations, and we have to be very clear about what our own needs and wants are, but also what we expect. And so 6 of one, half dozen of another.
One of the things I love that illustrates that point, you show Anya in her world, which should be idyllic for her because everyone's talking the same language. And you see how idyllic it is and how easy it is for her because she gets that world and they get her. But then you also see places where the conflicts arise because they are all drinking out of the same well at some point. And Greg can offer different things. And she does see the value in other aspects of Greg. I think it all comes down to communication in the end.
It does. And one of the motivating factors in this, so deep backstory, My father was an internist. He was a medical doctor, and my mother was an artist. And granted, this is another generation, so the issues, are somewhat different now. But there's still that same idea that, well, she was an artist, but he earned all the money. That played out in the relationship. So was she an artist first, or was she a doctor's wife?
All of those things about how we define ourselves also go into what we've said about how we tell our own narrative. And absolutely powerful. I love knowing that your parents were like that. I hope they had many, many, many wonderful years together, encouraging each other and opening up new sides of each other. Because that is the fun part, is that you can really expose people to things that they never would have done otherwise.
Yes.
Love that.
Their story certainly did not end like the butterfly trap ends.
I would think not. And I am very glad for that. I'm very glad for you that it didn't end like that. I was curious because this isn't your first rodeo. You are a prolific, wonderful writer. Over 30 mysteries written. Does it get easier over time, or does it become harder because you've covered so much ground?
It doesn't get easier. I think I share this with many of my writers friends. You start a new book and you think, how do I do this? I've forgotten how to write a book. What does get easier is that my husband and my friends all go, they all know me by now. So they all go, just keep writing, write the crappy first draft, you'll get back into it. They know not to take my panicking seriously. Other than that, I know some of the traps that I fall into. So that makes life easier. I know I tend to see a scene in my mind and I don't always put it all on the page. So I know, and I still don't do that. I mean, the first draft is still sort of sketchy, but I know that's going to happen. So that makes it easier. I know that I'm going to go back to it and go, there's this fully realized beautiful scene. And I read it and I go, there's nothing here but dialogue. And I know that I have to do that. So that makes it a little easier. But yes, every time it's like, why am I doing this? Why didn't I become a plumber?
Well, I guess my biggest question for you, after all of this amazing work you've produced, what do you do for fun, Clea?
I read a lot. I read a lot, and I listen to a lot of music. As you could probably tell from the butterfly trap, and if you look at World Enough, which is and Hold Me Down, which are set in the rock music world, I used to be a music critic, and now I have the luxury of, if I'm not enjoying a show, I can leave.
It's a different world when you don't have to be there, right?
Yes, and I love cooking, which is nowhere except that when you're working on a book and it's going to be 6 months to a year before you even have a rough draft, and even longer before it gets published. Being able to go downstairs from my office, which you see around me now, and just make dinner, and it's like 45 minutes later, there's something I can share, and it gives pleasure. That's just the best.
I totally know what you mean, because there are those moments where you feel like, I have a spoon and I am trying to take down Mount Everest.
Yes, exactly.
Something where there's an immediate gratification is so nice.
Yes. I created this dish, this roast chicken, and it will be good, because roast chicken's always good unless you don't cook it properly.
And you get to enjoy it, and you don't have to wait years.
Yes.
Clea, for all of your existing fans and for all the new fans that are just waiting to find you, where is the best place for people to find out what's going on and what's coming next?
I guess probably my website, which is, the unimaginatively named www.cleasimon.com.
Perfect. Well, again, thank you so much. This was such a fun read, and talking to you today has just been a joy.
Thank you so much, Marie. This has just been wonderful. I really appreciate this.
Again, the book is The Butterfly Trap. Thank you, Clea.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us on this episode of Twisted Passages. We hope to see you next time.